A very good evening to all our viewers. Welcome to today's edition of The Agenda. My name is Taiwan Jabela, your host. Tonight we are very excited to be speaking to Professor Joseph Diescho. He's a Namibian academic and writer currently based in Bonn, Germany. And he is here to talk to us about, a variety of things, his outlook on several things happening in the country, what he is doing in Germany, and also maybe comment on the calls for him and President Hage Geingob to reconcile. There was a letter to that regard in recent days. Professor Diescho, a very good evening to you, and what a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Wonderful. Maybe just to start, for context, you are in Bonn, Germany, and you've been there, I think, since 2019, if my memory serves me well. Just maybe to give us a sense of what you are doing in Germany, or maybe what was actually the motivation of moving to Germany.
Thank you so much. There was no motivation. The situation in my motherland was becoming increasingly untenable for me to stay there because I could not find any function. I could not make a living. It was very difficult. I was treated as a leper by friends and foes who feared to be associated with me, and I can understand that. So at that time, some German policymakers considered it prudent to offer me a brief reprieve if you like, and I left in a flash to come to Germany. I was in Berlin for a few months assisting the now foundation, to which I'm very grateful. They enabled me to leave. And then the University of Bonn Center for Strategic Security and Integration Studies invited me as a visiting professor. That's where I am right now, doing my own writings. I had just completed a book on Manifesto for Citizenship in Africa, trying to unravel, if you will, the difficulties that we face as citizens. The concept of citizenship has not arrived with us yet, and this is why we are in this quagmire, because Africans saw it either as rulers on the one hand or subjects on the other. There is no common ground there. We are not equal. The book is about, I'm just for President Thabo Mbeki to do the forward, and inshallah we shall launch it in Cape. Now I'm doing another book. I've been working on the Mandela virtue for a number of years because I was pretty closely associated with him. I saw his struggles. I'm attempting to bring out the Nelson Mandela that people do not know. Not the politician, but the boy from Tembuland who was struggling with the idea of what it meant to be a leader of other people. So that's all, and I hope completed by October this year. And then I'm venturing into a new terrain to really challenge, and that is the stalled, if you like, conversation between the German authorities and the Namibian authorities on the Herero-Nama genocide. There is no sufficient vocabulary on both sides to move towards a common ground. So I want to sink my teeth into that and explain what can be done, particularly from the vantage point of Namibia, enable Germany to must do and has to do. So in short, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm in the field of research and thinking new. Job creation, or no, not job creation. We generate ideas.
Yeah,
We generate,
indeed.
yes.
Indeed, Professor. One of the parting shots. I don't know whether to call it a parting shot, but it's a remark that you made at the time of you leaving the country in 2019. I was going through my archives, and in a Namibian Sun article from around that time, you said something to the effect that the African intellectuals, public intellectuals like yourself, face some sort of threat from your government, your country's governments, and you sort of alluded to something to that effect in your introductory remarks there. Do you think there's a chronic situation in Africa now where public intellectuals who speak their minds and who propose alternative policy ideas are sort of being haunted by their governments?
It would not be fair to our governments to say they haunt public intellectuals. What is accurate is that the environment in the African politics in pre-colonial times, colonial times, and post-colonial time is not conducive for constructive dialogue. In Africa, you cannot offer constructive criticism. You either construct or you criticize. In other words, we lack in our linguistic formation, as it were, objectivity, conjunctivity, that subjunctiveness of saying, I wish I were in Cape Town tomorrow. In Africa, you can't say that. You are either here or in Cape Town. So intellectuals who have been schooled critical thinking hardly have space in Africa to carry out their enterprise. For example, I have written praiseworthy articles about our president right now. And then, of course, I wrote critical articles. People only remember the critical articles, not the praiseworthy articles. So it is our common problem as Africans that we cannot reason with the readiness to agree to disagree. You either agree or disagree, and no civilization can evolve and develop if there is no middle ground. That common ground which says, when we disagree, we go back to that particular preference. In other words, there is no reference point of being equal in Africa. If you were not in the liberation struggle, my friend, you have no voice in Namibia right now. You have to lie. That's why people are making all sorts of arguments. They lie, in fact, that they were in the liberation struggle. They were nowhere near the liberation struggle. But you have to tell that lie to survive.
It's interesting, Professor. So in that regard, now that you've touched on the subject of what you've written in regards to the leadership style of President Hage Geingob, there was a call recently made by academics, religious leaders, and politicians who said that it would be very nice if you and the president reconciled. It's a public document. Namibian Sun spoke to you last week. You said that you have not wronged the president, or unless the president points out in how you have wronged him, you have no reason to apologize, and therefore sort of pointing to the difficulty you'll have to reconcile when you haven't done anything wrong. If you can expand on that a little bit, Professor.
It's difficult for me to take a position whether to reconcile with my head of state or not. You see, reconciliation invokes a together of parties that were once together and they went astray. My brother, I suffered an insecurity for a very long time after what was done to me. I wrecked my brains and my soul and my bones and my flesh to find out what it is that I could have done so totally wrong to bring about the anger and haste and hatred on the part of the president, a man that I've known for a very long time as a very kind administrator. I could not come up with an answer to that. To the extent that I went to some luminaries in our country to help me understand, so that if it was necessary, I would apologize. I spoke to both the vice presidents, the late Tate Yambo, and then before I left, I spoke to Vice President Nangolo Mbumba. I spoke directly to President Pohamba. I spoke directly twice to the officers of the National Intelligence Services. I spoke to various bishops. As a matter of fact, I even met with the First Lady, trying to understand where my wrongs were so that I would atone to it. President Geingob is the only president I call my president. As a citizen, it was incumbent upon me to right the wrong once I knew what the wrong was, and I still do not know. Secondly, I had hoped the moment would come for the leadership to explain where I went wrong administratively, criminally, legally, or contractually, so that I would make amends on that. The reason came in August 2019 during the elections campaign, when politicians really tell the truth to the people because they want to be elected. The president was asked in Rundu by two very good patriots of Namibia, can you take us into your confidence and tell us here and now what it is that Joseph Diescho did to make you so hateful towards him, that those who broke the law and committed crimes are roaming freely, but he has no space in this country. I thought, now, yes, my president set the record straight. I really thought in my little world, this is the moment for us to hear the truth. And then I would apologize. I had expected the president to say at that moment, like I would see Nelson Mandela, Julius Nyerere, Bama, and the likes take that moment to say, look, I am the head of state. As such, I don't get involved in administrative matters of ministries, agencies, and organizations. Never mind public enterprises. Therefore, I did not participate in what happened at NIPAM. However, on the basis of what I was told, the law was followed. And he would stop there. I would be out of his hair completely. That's what a leader does. To educate, explain, and give a framework of better living in a society, better relationships in a society. No, the president gets very angry and he says, this Diescho, he's a failure. He's useless. I brought the wilderness. I was not in the wilderness. Now he offers 4 reasons for my dismissal. You see, he does not deny that he was involved. He explains why he was involved. He says, reason number 1, he did not pay his municipal account at the city of Windhoek. Number 2, I was told by the late Theo Ben-Gurion, Helmut Angula, and Peter Kashavivi that he was not a trustworthy SWAPO member. Now, my brother, this conversation took place in 1992-93. For a leader of a country to hold a grudge about a rumor that is more than 20 years ago, troubling. Three, he says, there was dictums written there, and none of them was about NEPAM, which is not a true statement. I wrote a number of dictums explaining why the Namibian government, in its wisdom, created an institution called NEPAM. As a matter of fact, the president himself will remember that I wrote a very praiseworthy, if you will, article about his trip to China. And I remember him calling me at 7:30 in the morning to say, thank you for writing about us. Nobody writes about it, about us and what we are doing so eloquently. Now, how can he say, oh no, before I get there, and I wrote a piece or two about why Namibia is the model nation for national reconciliation in Africa, not South Africa. I wrote another piece in the dictum saying, people say that Mauritius and Botswana are the most peaceful countries in Africa. I said, no, Namibia is, because neither Botswana nor Mauritius fought a liberation war. Namibia's leaders came out of a very difficult history of fighting, war, and managed to put us on a course towards reconciliation. I point out that in June 1986, before the UN plan was underway, SWAPO held a consultation in Angola and decided, if it came to power, the policy of national reconciliation will be pursued. You see, Nelson Mandela's ANC was pushed into reconciliation mode. SWAPO volunteered to enter the path of reconciliation with all the former foes, including white South Africans who were parading as killers in Namibia. That is on the record. Now, for the president to say, I did not write about good things, is what Shakespeare would describe as a terminological inexactitude. Reason number four, he says, he does not own a house here in Kavango, and he says he cares about you. To the extent that the president, as head of state, says in public, this Diescho sleeps at the Catholic church here when he comes to Rundu because he's so poor, in other words. Now, what do these reasons have to do with my ability to serve my small nation? It did not end there. Just this year, he was asked a question in Parliament. Again, he flies off the handle and he vilifies, humiliates me in the National Assembly. So it's not for me to seek reconciliation. It's for my leader to say, look, you messed up here. What do we do now? Remember also, he spoke in Parliament this year. He said something that he has not said before. He writes me secret letters. These are reactions to people who wished me to communicate with the president that I'm willing to have a space to talk with him. No, he dismisses that and he humiliates me, saying he writes me secret letters. In fact, he says he even goes to our embassies. Why would he take an interest on whether I go to embassies or not? That's my embassy too, as far as I'm concerned. That's not the language of a head of state. That's not a language of a leader who's building a nation. That's not a language of a peacemaker. That's a language of a person with a very dark heart.
Professor, we go for a quick break and return for the next part of the show. We continue our conversation with Professor Joseph Diescho. Prof, let's talk about the events at home, and you are a keen follower of what's happening at home. This year we have the SWAPO Congress coming up in November, I'm told, and succession politics has always brought us a lot of tension in the country, and it holds us back in some respects. I mean, we were talking about reconciliation. You are in Germany, where things like succession are taking place quite effectively and smoothly, but in our country, it gets very, very nasty. What have we learned from the past succession battles, especially in SWAPO, and are there better ways to do it actually than it is done currently?
That's a very profound concern that you have. Perhaps a philosophical note may help us. The African society, the African communities, African civilization as such, always been in turmoil at moments of succession. Africa as a worldview does not have a template for succession politics. We do not have a formula by which a successor follows a predecessor. To the extent that most of the migration of Africans from northeast to the south, where we are now, were a consequence of succession politics difficulties. In other words, in Africa, generally, when there are two aspirants to the throne, whether it's an uncle who's dying and the two nephews want to take over, or a father in patrilineal societies, when there were two or more, one of those people had to die or leave and settle elsewhere. That's our problem now. There's hardly a place where Africans live where there's no strife when succession politics is in discussion. Look at the landscape of Namibian traditional authorities as such. There's hardly any traditional authority who will not be bedeviled right now. Session. Start with the functional community of the Herero. They cannot agree who the next paramount chief will be without strife. In Kavango, in the former Vamboland, the south. So you see that in Africa, politics is really a zero-sum game. If you lose everything. If you win everything. Because African civilization is one breadwinner, one gatherer community. But if you think back to where we come from, you will see very disturbing patterns of our own behavior as Africans, as Namibians. If I, as an uncle of my brother's children and my sister's children, if successful as a business person in my village, my nephew and my nieces are successful too with me. As a matter of fact, many of them will stop going to school because their uncle is well off. I remember having a very distinguished school principal. His nephews became mini principals too and that is what leads to our difficulties of governance. A person governs for the community, for the family, to the extent that you acquire more members of family than you knew before you became a leader. Hence the corruption that that's so terrible in Africa. Because everybody comes to live with you. You are the successful one. Succession in Namibia is very, very difficult because we have not dealt with what I call the national question. Maybe this is more to your question, the national question. The Afrikaners in the old days used to call it the nationale vraagstuk. Okay, the national question is the question that a polity is the top layer of the political leadership at any given time. They come together and say, we have this privilege to serve our people. It is a fortuitous responsibility. It's not permanent. It's God-given, sister-given, it's spirit-given, it's divine. What do we do with the power and influence we have to make life better for our people, the nation? And this is where the Americans started right. In Philadelphia, when they were quarreling and debating about what the American society should become after they ran away from Europe, they, in their own words, said, we want to create a system of government that the human race has never seen before. That's very deep. Now, you will find in Namibia, in our historiography, when the leaders came together quietly and say, what kind of Namibia do we want to create? Our reasoning has been predicated upon oppression by others, being colonized by others. In other words, we pretty much agreed what we were against, but we never agreed, as it were, what it is that we want. In other words, our leaders have remained in the mode of struggle. If you disagreed with them, you were the other. We have a politics of othering. And if you are the other, you have no place, no relevance, no role. Succession is further complete in Namibia by the mushrooming of tribal identities. When you think back, even as recently as 2016, 2017, there were fewer kings, if you like, in Namibia than now. As a matter of fact, our law recognizes traditional chiefs as custodians of traditional jurisdictions. Now we have kings. The consequence of us failing to address the national question. Let me give you an example of African leaders who dealt with it with more success than others. Julius Kambarage Nyerere. Julius Kambarage Nyerere, at the time of independence, inherited 120 tribes. We don't have so many in Namibia, and we're such a small nation. You can really manage it. Julius Nyerere said, in order for us to become one nation, there are certain things we must do, and that is tone down, as it were, the volume on tribe and traditional leaders and turn up the volume on nation. That's why you do not have chiefs in Tanzania right now. He destroyed, for lack of a better word, traditional chiefs. There's only one country in Africa according to the desktop evidence, that does not suffer the risk of having a tribal war, and that's Tanzania. They have political party wars. They have ideological wars. But tribe, Nyerere made a point of using the school system, for example, to orchestrate that children from Dodoma would go and learn for 5 to 10 years in the village that is not their own. And to the surprise of many, after 5, 10 years, those children were no longer conscious of their tribal identity, but they were Tanzanians. Nyerere encouraged people to change their surnames to the extent that in Tanzania you would find pitch black people with the surname Daniel, with a surname that is not any, that does not have any resemblance to tribal identity. In that way, Nyerere wanted to render blunt the easy assumption that if you are a Shipanga, you are a Shivambo. You can't do that in Tanzania. The point is, it took leadership to think that through. And now you see, Nyerere went as far as teaching people how to be a Tanzanian. And he went and invoked the spirituality of Africa. He called it African socialism. That was the mantra that he used. I talked to him in 1996, and he said, no, maybe we used the wrong words. Here is the point. Tanzania has Nyerere, a very exemplary president, very humble, very articulate, very empathetic, very sympathetic, very understanding. Nyerere possessed a huge reservoir of emotional intelligence. My friend Amin Pungwe, who was a long-time ambassador of Nyerere, says, when there was a dispute in cabinet or in the public service, Nyerere would call everybody and ask the person accused, please help us how to deal with this. In other words, not own the solution, he facilitated the solution. He would in school and in churches, mgeni siku mbili, siku tatu mpe jembe akalime. Africa, you are a guest days only. Siku mbili. On the third day, you are a member of the family. Tukupe jembe, will give you a hoe, ukalime. Go and work land. The spirit of work was very important to Julius Nyerere. My sadness is I do not see our leaders bring a national psyche, a national psychology, a national of doing things. We are back to where we were fighting wars along tribe, political party. Now, wealth has become a determining divider. Are you rich or not? So when the president says to people in Kavango who are very poor, this man doesn't have a house here, therefore he cannot serve you. That statement is a textbook statement of how you destroy a nation. In other words, if you don't steal to have a mansion that everybody admires in your village, you are useless. You are a failure. We do not have a template to think about succession. Now, we are going back, therefore, to our instinctive, primitive, primordial mode of tribe. My king, my chief, my clan. Who has a name like mine? Who speaks like me? That's not how nations are formatted. What's really at the point here that lacks a leadership as dream, and where I am as guilty as any other intellectual that we failed to assist our leaders with a model of the kind of Namibia that we want. You see, I had the privilege to craft Mandela's speech to the African-speaking community in there. And it was crafted totally in Afrikaans. And we did not understand why. And Nelson Mandela read George Hotel in Midrand in Afrikaans, broken Afrikaans, but the point is he reached the Afrikaners in the core of the course. Let me fast forward. In the last appearance Nelson Mandela made in the National Assembly in Cape Town, he said, if the ANC treats you South Africans in the future the way in which the National Party treated you, I urge you to rise up against the ANC. Now, that is what I call a national question. No one, none of our three presidents so far, has gone beyond party politics, beyond national politics, to the level of national politics. And the reason I say I failed with others is that honestly, Tatekulu Samuel Nyoma should be above politics, above party politics when he retired. If we find our hearts to give him nomenclature as the father of the Namibian nation, it means to me that he's the only one in Namibia who has the right and obligation and rule to appear at any party rally. He's the father of all the parties. He's the father of all the children in Namibia. He cannot wear a SWAPO hat, SWAPO shirt, SWAPO shoes because it's a problem, not a solution. Now, what am I saying?
Yeah.
We are at the crossroads of not having the correct leadership to take us beyond what we have. The absence of that leadership, we go back to our villages and we become insecure, vulnerable, indifferent, judgmental. We become fearful. Tatekuli Atoivo told me before he passed away, we used to meet quite regularly to do our own things, and we spoke in Xhosa to each other so that others around us would not understand. He learned, is it Xhosa on Rwanda? I learned, is it Xhosa South Africa? He said to me, in this country, my nephew, as he used to call me, in this country, you need to be afraid. You don't need to know what to be afraid of, but you have to show that you are afraid. It's safer to be afraid. And that rings true in my body, in my brain, in my soul all the time.
Prof, in the interest of time, thank you for that elaborate input. In the interest of time, I have one more question for you, and that is the question again on succession. You know, the profiling of candidates, not on the basis of their skills, their past, their ideologies, but on the basis now suddenly of their gender. If you are a woman, it's time for a woman president. If you are Vambu, it's time for Kwanyama president or Mbaja president. And there's little conversation about the quality of the person and what they bring to the table. Your comment on that?
You are so right. You are so right. It started in 2012 when we all got too excited about the non-Oshivambo president. In other words, we went back to the mode of othering, the mode of saying non this, not pro this. And we all got carried away, and that produced the current president. The results are more negative than positive. No society can move forward by defining itself in the negative. None this, none that. Now we are saying we need a non-male president, in other words. We forget, and we forgot in 2012, maybe throughout, that positions of leadership do not make people, do not change people. Positions of leadership reveal who the people are. If we have not seen quality from my perspective, SWAPO leadership that is in the battles now, if we have not seen quality leadership so far, and we're only looking for the dress code, is the person wearing a dress or pants, we have lost the point. We have lost direction. What we should be doing, it's not even about youth. You see, young people in Namibia make this terrible mistake that to be young is by itself a competency to lead. And they forget that in a few years, they will no longer be young. They will be accused for the same sins that they are accusing others of now. Leaders must reveal a quality, a competency, some gifts that they can take the country forward. Not because they've been around on the bus or in the elevator that arrived on floor 10 and therefore they must lead. No, we need to rethink about who our leaders should be. Membership of SWAPO as such does not make you a leader. Opposition to SWAPO as such does not make you a leader either. What makes a leader is the inner spirit, the inner voice that you want to do things differently. And I am sad I'm not hearing enough of that, even from the credible opposition. The credible opposition is more anti-SWAPO than pro anything else. Again, we are in the politics of negative consciousness. I would like the debate, the conversation to be about, given the PC in front of us now, who amongst them possesses to take us forward? Not the most fear, not the most silent, not the most beautiful, not the oldest, but the one like Darwin said, the society that will survive the best is the society that can adapt to change better than others. A leader who can help us adapt to change. And my friends, this change will not come from investors. This change will not come from taking Gaza to Dubai. This change will come from empowering, as it were, the Namibian people to be agents and agencies of that change. That the Namibian people become the instruments of development. Vision 2030 was more than correct. That the most important aspect of Vision 2030 is the human resource of Namibia. In other words, the Namibian people themselves, most of them who happen to be young, and most of them who happen to be women. There is debate about how we want to forge this nation going forward. We are still quarreling about who stole who. I understand that, but that's neither here. That's not it. You cannot fight a campaign because someone is corrupt. That's not it. When, if I have a moment, you know what make apartheid successful? Toivo, are you there?
I'm there, Professor. No, please engage me on that.
Okay. You can cut it out, but just for you to know, and this is what I learned and what I teach here.
Yeah.
It's about a leader's responsibility to create a vocabulary, to create a language, to create a mindset that brings people together even when they disagree, but to define a common enemy that, as it were, frightens them when they are not together anymore. Now, apartheid is not what we think it is. Apartheid is not the separate sets of races. Apartheid is much deeper than that. Apartheid was addressing the national question of the white minority in South Africa. In June 1948, Dr. Daniel Francois Malan was sworn in as the new Prime Minister of the Union of South Africa. 4 republics, Transvaal, Cape Province, and Free State. The person was a theologian. You hear me? He wrestled
Yes.
with God. He wrestled with God. He wrestled with his purpose in the life of people as it was ordained by God. Now, all of June 1940, Malan won in as minister. And this is fundamental to our understanding why Namibia, why Africa is not going anywhere. Malan spoke for 20 minutes in his inaugural speech. As a matter of fact, the inaugural is entitled Drie Mikpunte. Drie Mikpunte. In other words, 3 targets. Punt in Afrikaans is stronger than it's. And he says, hello, South Africans. In that audience at the Union buildings, Toivo, there was not a black African, not a single colored South African, not a single Indian South African. He says, I've been in the business politics for 33 years because God wants me to accomplish 3 objectives, 3 goals, to hit 3 targets. Mikpunt number 1, target 1. Om die geskeurde geleerde Afrikaner volk te heel. To put together and bring together all the fractures and parts of the African community and constitute in them one community who will be in charge of the economy of this country. Are you with me?
Yes.
So he provides a meaningful life for the people who were previously disadvantaged. In 1948, you would not find an Afrikaans-speaking, a Dutch-speaking person who was principal of a school, who was a director in the bank. Many of them were in British concentration camps. He lifts them up to become the superior in South Africa. Would you not go with someone who gives you such hope and confidence to go in church? That's how they became Boere farmers. He sized farming. He gave them tractors, gave them fertilizers, gave them land, and in fact, gave them black workers who were paid very, very meagerly. That's a national question. Number 2, he says, we will not survive in this part of the world as harbingers, as carriers, as messengers of the Western Christian civilization. If the 2 races stand apart from each other, that's how he uses the word apart, which became later apartheid. Now, the 2 races at this point were not black and white. It was the English-speaking white South African on the one hand, and the Dutch or African-speaking white South Africans on the other. These were the 2 races. The others were not a race. They were others. And number 3, Mikpunt number 3. We must create an economy wherein the black people will be taught to be servants in perpetuity. Are you with me?
Yes.
That was the ideology of apartheid. The rest is commentary. In other words, we must teach the black people to know that their place in our economy is that drawers of water and hewers of wood. And between 1948 and 1961, when South Africa becomes a republic, there were more than 50 pieces of legislation and acts of parliament to put those 3 objectives in place. Birth Registration Act, Citizens Education Act, Traveling Act, Public Transportation Act, Religious Act. Public Amenities Act, and. All of them said a black person cannot be there unless they are servicing to the pleasure of white people. Tell me, who amongst our leaders so far has explained how the tribes in Namibia are related to another and how they should work together to create one Namibian nation? None. None. We are still
Absolutely.
fighting colonial wars. Colonialism is gone, but we are still saying, when a leader of a national stature says, where were the others? They were with the Boers. Hello, what do you expect a child who was born in 1992 to say? When we accuse you young people, where were you? We fought, we liberated this country. We fought. As a matter of fact, our leaders say we died for this country. He's still alive, but he says, I died. What do you expect a young people at UNAM, IUM, and NAS to say? Oh, sorry, sir, I was not born yet. Because if I were born, I would have participated in the struggle too. In other words, our politics inject continuously a psychosis of complex, either
Wonder.
on tribal lines or other lines. If you are a Nama, you have to apologize. Are you Swapo or hibernating for Swart Boy? If you're Kavango, you are stupid. If you're a hibernating secessionist, and there is no leadership to weave together these identities into one quilt and a blanket under which we can sleep as one nation. None, either from the SWAPO leadership or opposition. In other words, our leaders want to be leader, they want to be president, but not solve the problems that emanate from the national question.
Wonderful. Professor Diescho, I owe you a debt of gratitude for a very wise counseling on the show tonight.
You see, in isiZulu, I would say, Kubonga mean, I am the one to thank you for this opportunity. We have a
Thank you
nation to
very
build, and we are all
wonderful.
responsible. No one is an angel. And to go back to your own question about reconciliation, President Geingob is the only head of state I call my president. And I would do everything possible to make sure that he leads the country in Namibia that is successful tomorrow and years beyond.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor,
Thank
for
you.
your time. I hope we talk again soon.
Anytime, sir. God bless you.
Thank you, sir. That
Thank
was
you.
Professor Joseph Diescho on the agenda tonight. Thank you for watching.